What's going on, everybody? This is Moose and Brian here from OccupyFantasy.com, at OccupyFantasy on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm your host, Moose, at CFB_Moose on Twitter is where you can find me, the co-founder and data guru here at Occupy Fantasy. Alongside Brian, at Brian Jester FF on Twitter. He's co-founder and CEO of Occupy Fantasy. How's it going, Brian?
What's up, Moose? Week 2 of 18 of a busy Saturday. So, yeah, everything's all good. And I got to say, though, I feel a lot better this week than I did last week as far as preparation goes and routines. It was tough last week with getting everything done in time. But now I feel a little more organized and feel good. And the slate's going to be interesting, so I'm excited.
I know. I didn't want to say this on the $1 Million Mission or the pre-stream show last week, but I just felt like I was looking at a foreign language week 1, and I was just like, I know how to do this, and I'm just like, I just can't do it. And it was just something that was interesting, just something you figure for, 6 months or so, you're not doing it, and now you have to get back in the groove of things. So it's definitely interesting, but I'm definitely back in the groove now. And really quick before we jump into questions and everything that's going on, we did have some issues with the microphone last week. My volume was significantly higher or lower than Brian's. So if you're in the chat and if you can hear us both just fine, let us know. Give us a thumbs up. And if you need us to turn either mics up or down, let us know as well. But Brian, let's jump right into it. We were just talking about it right before we talked in the slate, and the stacks are a little bit tricky this week.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to start the discussion, right? So if you look, first of all, it's a crazy week as far as spreads go. There are a decent amount of teams that are favored by a touchdown or more, and there aren't that many high totals, right? Normally we're used to seeing multiple totals over 50. We saw the product was cooked last year, and total started to drop as a result. And it's kind of the same this week as well. If you look at totals, right, on the main slate, we have one total over 50 points, and that's just that Vegas and Arizona game at 52. And then we have Detroit and Washington, of all games, total of 49. Every other game is below 47 points. So it makes stacking pretty tricky. And I was thinking about this all week, basically. And I think we touched on it in the $1 Million Mission before, too. And the fact that there is now 12 games on this main slate compared to the 9 or 10 we get in the middle of the season when there are buys and random Saturday games. And also add in the fact that the pricing is kind of weird and the totals aren't that high. I'm leaning a little more towards 2x1 game stacks myself this week, unless spots stick out, right? Unless it's very clear which 3 players you want to play from one side. But if without huge game environments and with so many other options that can get there, I think I'm leaning more to 2x1 stacks. And I think that's a product of just the quality of the game stacks this week, Moose.
Yeah, game stacks are not the best looking. We've pointed out several reasons. Brian just did just now. But yeah, so that's very interesting. We're going to go ahead and get right into what Chris wrote up in the plug. But first, 2 comments here in the chat. One from David said, based on last year's DFS meta, is elite wide receivers a must in smaller contests and leagues? That's a great question.
I think we'd both agree, right, Moose, right? Like This week, we especially have Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp. Right, so those 2 guys especially rate favorably in pretty much any projection system. They're the top 2 in our model, which says a lot, right? Because sometimes we'll have some high-priced guys that the model's like, hey, not so fast. No, the model's like, no, definitely play these dudes, right? They have an OF index of 65 and 54 respectively. No one else over 45 on DraftKings. Same tiers over on FanDuel. So we saw. And this kind of ties into the second comment, which Thomas in the chat says he went back and watched week 7 of the $1 Million Mission last year. Great show, must watch. Thanks, appreciate that. We thought so as well. And in that show, we talked about how integral elite wide receivers were, but especially moves in those smaller contests.
Yeah, in the smaller contests, they were just so good. And as we talked about several times before, the Occupy model is built for high risk, and it doesn't include anything related to ownership whatsoever. So if you go to a wide receiver or the wide receiver model, you see Cooper Kupp, absolute chalk smash. In this case, Devontae Adams is even more chalk, 20 to 25%, and he's one of the highest ranked players. It means he's ranked highly up there for a reason. Like we've noticed in the last couple of years, elite wide receivers are just really good. I don't know if it's because defenses are getting more poor or offense coordinators are just more geniuses, but elite wide receivers are fantastic. If they're great in high risk, it means that they're also great in low or contests, leagues, even low risk too. So definitely keep an eye out for that. So I think you could even drop down, Brian, to let's actually really quick before, I guess this also kind of ties into stats, but ranked 4 in our model, Tyreek, he's chalk. I almost say, I don't know if you can call him an elite wide receiver. I would say so, probably yes, but especially with injuries, and it seems like he could really pop out today too, or I guess tomorrow.
I think he's obviously elite from a skill perspective and fantasy perspective, but he's just not as consistently destroy your lineups if you didn't play him like Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams, right? So
yeah.
But I think the one major talking point, and unfortunately it's a major talking point because I've seen so many people on Twitter say it, I've seen people in our Discord talk about it, are the injuries to the Baltimore secondary. I don't know how that's going to impact your typical projections out there, but I think that's for me the clearest stack, right? There's so many other stacks that I'm on the fence about, but Baltimore and Miami is the easiest stack because Baltimore is down at least 3 of their top 4 corners this week, and as we've talked about many times before, secondary injuries are huge. For opposing teams' fantasy production, especially at wide receiver. We always talk about the Julio Jones versus San Francisco in the FanDuel World Fantasy Football Championship, right? These situations pop up and they're too good. I think ownership will increase a bit because of that. It's been too popular. Like, it's been talked about so much that I think people who, deviate from projections a little bit will bump them up some. But I don't think people are going to stack Tua, right? You see Tyreek 17%, but you see Tua at 3%. Or whatever it is. So I think stacking that game for me is the easiest one, and I'm still pretty shocked, Moose, that total was only 44 or whatever it is.
Yeah, I don't know. That's so crazy. It just seems very odd to me. I don't know why that total hasn't done anything. And but yeah, back to what we were talking about. We've talked about it time and time again. Wide receiver cornerback matchups, normally speaking, do not matter. But when there is injuries to the backfield, we've ran the back testing. It's absolutely huge positive correlation for the wide receiver when their starting cornerback is out. But let me actually ask you this, and it's almost ties into Ed's question. With Tyreek being 15, 20% owned, probably more in some smaller contests, do you think just stacking Tua would get you there, or do you think maybe you go Tua and Waddle, who has similar targets but significantly less ownership?
I think it's fine, dude. I think because again, 2 or 3%, maybe he gets bumped up a little more depending on the contest. But like, 2 is not gonna. He's not gonna be highly owned, right? Everyone's gonna want to play Derek Carr and all these other quarterbacks, right? So if you just play Tua with Tyreek running back with Bateman or Andrews, that's enough, right? That's all you need to do. And so speaking of Ed's question, right? If you're going 2x1, and this was a question that we got in Discord earlier. If you're playing a 2x1 stack, and just those who are unfamiliar, 2x1 means 2 players from one team, including the quarterback, plus 1 from the opposing team. And generally, we reserve these 2x1 stacks, right, Moose, for rushing quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, because they can get some with their legs and they throw to a receiver, and that's all you need for the 2 part of the stack. Again, earlier in the season, 2x1 with more teams on the slate, lower totals, really what you could do is just stack, receiver, and then you run it back with. It depends on how the lineup looks, and this is why I like using the lineup builder so much, right? To say, let me lock into it in Tyreek, and then see what player on Baltimore is popping a bunch in the top of the lineups that are being projected to see what fits the best with this current slate. So it might be Andrews, it might be Rashad Bateman. If you're flipping the other side, right? If you play Lamar and Mark Andrews, maybe it's telling you to run it back with Chase Edmonds, right? So it's really it's not you have to play this type of player as the opposing stack. It's really what fits the best based on the slate.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to use the lineup builder if you're making just a small handful or just one lineup. I've done this countless times, more times than I can count. It's like, okay, I really like this stack, and I always go with the conundrum: do I bring it back with the running back, the wide receiver type, whatever? But let me just and sometimes it's happened where it's too close to lock time, whatever. You have 5 players, and you're like, all right, well, I got to get this built. I'm not going to switch out certain players or whatever. You have your builder spit you out 300 times and be like, all right, 75% of the time Andrews. It's like, oh, well, maybe I should probably go with Andrews here and go with that. So then it's a great way to use the lineup builder in that sense. And maybe one of these times we can actually I don't have the lineup builder up now, but maybe next week we can bring that up and see how that works.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that.
Yep. And Ed says, thoughts on Likely at tight end since he ran mainly wide receiver routes.
It's funny, we made fun of Likely in Discord last week. Everyone's saying, can I play Likely? And it's like, dude, there's 26 teams on the slate. But I think his role was a little different than most expected. Maybe I overlooked it, right? But I didn't expect him to play basically slot receiver the entire game, right? Over the entire time he was on the field. 4 targets, and 4 targets at 2,500 in what should be a good game environment. it's pretty useful, I would think. And again, there's 12 teams on the slate. You're digging deep. But if you want to jam Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Jonathan Taylor, or any of these other expensive guys, and Lamar stacks can get pricey pretty quickly, I don't hate it. But I would only include him if it was like a 3-by-1, right? He's the third Curtis Samuel piece.
I think that makes perfect sense, yeah. Or the other thing is, I was actually looking here, trying to find him. I mean, he's only, if you play the showdown slate, I know DraftKings has, like, in FanDuel, all the games are showdown as well, albeit smaller prizes. Likely he's only 1,200 in the flex. That's very good. We saw the other day on Thursday where that small piece can get you in the optimal.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean those types of guys. Obviously, you can play them on the main slate. I'd much prefer playing them on the derivative slates, right? The earlier or afternoon, or the showdown.
Yep, definitely. Ken, who's just trying to stick that knife into us from week 1, says any games impacted by weather, rain in San Francisco could be bad for Lance and wide receivers again.
Yeah, I think that's the only one, right? And it's supposed to rain the entire game again. Somehow, the universe is conspiring against Trey Lance in the passing game. Yeah, I think it's going to rain a decent amount there. I think that total has dropped, if I'm not mistaken. So, let me see here. The total's down at least a half point for the 49ers team total's down a half point. So, yeah, that's the only one that we're worried about, right? No other wind or rain concerns outside of San Francisco, Seattle.
Yeah, and we can pull this up here. This is the quarterback model tab that I have up here. And we do track. This is something that people have been asking for a while. We implemented it last year. But we do have a change in OF index since the model gets released on Wednesday. And if we look at whose OF index has dropped the most since opening, it is Trey Lance. Minus 5 points.
There you go. So it's picking up on the total dropping, the weather. Model's picking up on it. So
definitely. And I guess, actually, if we go to the other side, I'm always happy. I had to point this out because, as a huge Cincinnati fan, we got Mixon as the cover boy. But Cincinnati, Joe Burrow is the only person above 5. Carr, Mills, and Flacco are +1. Any of these top quarterbacks that have the highest OF index change stand out to you?
All right, let's talk about this game, right? We got to talk the Cincinnati and Dallas game because I feel a lot of members are going to ask about it. And if you just sort by OF index, we see Cooper Rush in the top 5 of the model. And yeah, you may say, what is this? What kind of model is this, right? And again, remember, it's based on exceeding expectations in high-risk contests based on your salary, right? And when you have Cooper Rush at 1% owned, at the minimum quarterback price of $5K, we expect him to throw 35+ times in this game, right? When he got the spot start last year against Minnesota, he attempted, I think, 40 passes. When he actually didn't look that bad when Dak got hurt last week, and they just threw him in there, and he was passing. They're going to run pretty much the same offense, right? It won't be as efficient, obviously, as Dak, but they're going to throw a lot, and this game could be a shootout. So, based on the number of pass attempts and his salary, he has a great chance of exceeding expectations. And Moose, I know this game popped in your game stack metrics as well. When you have a cheap quarterback like Cooper Rush, right? Let's say you 2-by-1 him with CeeDee Lamb, you run it back with Jamar Chase or Mixon or whoever, right? The fact that he's only $5K really opens up to allow you to play another Cooper Kupp or Devontae Adams or Jonathan Taylor or whoever it is. So I'm excited about the possibility, and when there's so many warts in the other game stacks, I don't mind playing this one, especially on DraftKings. FanDuel, I'm not as excited because the pricing doesn't matter as much. Definitely more of a DraftKings stack, I think. But the price savings it gets you, it pops a lot. When I ran the builders today, I actually put in like 10 or 12 quarterbacks that I liked, and the most likely quarterback to end up near the top was Cooper Rush, and it makes sense because of his salary.
Wow, nice. That's yeah, and if you sort on FanDuel, he's in the bottom half of, and that just shows how important pricing is.
Exactly. So, speaking of game stacks, Moose, I do want to ask you who else was popping in yours, because we got a couple questions today. One from longtime member .bets. It says, are you targeting Washington, Detroit, or Houston, Denver as a game stack? And then I think we got another question here. No, that was the only game stack question that we got. So where do those two rank for you? Which 3 or 4 stand out the most to you?
Okay, yeah. So just first overall, the stacks that we're officially recommending in the Daily Plug: Atlanta and the Rams, Miami and Baltimore, Arizona and Vegas. I do want to come back to that Baltimore game afterwards, but in my rankings that I have Atlanta and Rams, Arizona, Vegas, and then Cincinnati, Dallas. Now that that you said the Houston game. I got burned on it last week with Davis Mills, but they're right next to it. They're right after it. Denver, Houston.
Here's the
So
thing, really quickly, about those types of games, and maybe we didn't have this really last week, and I'm sure a lot of people have forgotten over the last 6 or 8 months or whatever it is. When you have a game with a high spread, right? Like Denver is favored over Houston by 10.5 points, whatever it is. So 10 points. Really, there are two ways to play it. You don't have to run the underdog there. The underdogs on super large underdogs, the quarterbacks on super large underdogs, don't get there very often, right? Instead, what you want to do is just one side stack that game. So if you game stack, right, don't put Mills and Wilson in your player pool. Just put Russell Wilson. And we've seen this even more so in the last couple of years with more disparity between the teams. Sure, you can 2x1 stack or 3x1 stack, but we also see 3x0 stacks get there.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, especially early season, we see those get there. So stack Russ with Jerry Jeudy and Alberto, or Cortland Sutton and Alberto, and don't feel the need to run it back, because if they're going to blow them out, they don't need the other side to necessarily put up that many points. So I think if you stack Denver Houston, you can just stack the Denver side, and it's not obligatory to use a Houston player in that game stack.
It's gonna be lit when you need like 3 points from a Denver stack, and then they just run the ball all the way down to 1 second and miss a field goal.
Those fucking assholes.
I know, but no, I actually wanted to go back. We talked about the Baltimore game. We talked about it a lot. We literally mentioned this last week, and I want to get your take on it, Brian. We literally said last week Lamar Jackson will basically never be number one in our model because he has such a high rushing upside, and rushing quarterbacks normally don't get there. With him being number one in the model now, OF Index ranking almost 64, one, do you think he gets there? And two, how does he get there?
Yeah, great question. And funny how the model's like, not so fast, friends. Yeah. This is let's not make assumptions about us, right? Because it's crazy to see that, especially after we said it last week. But again, they might have to. I mean, I would not be shocked if this game scores like 64 points, right? Mm-hmm. Let's clip that when its final score is 17-14. But I would not be shocked if their secondary is as hurt as it seems they are, and Miami puts up points. We saw Miami put up points last week against New England's defense, which is traditionally pretty good. Then Baltimore's going to have to throw, and they're going to have to be. And I think the model's picking up on the potential back and forth in this game. So the one thing that stuck out to me was Tua's low ranking, but the model is not specifically accounting for the 3 missed players in the opposing secondary. So I'm manually bumping up Tua because of that, and really no projection system is going to be able to capture that accurately. So it's one of those things where you have to just use your own mind and do it.
It makes sense to me. Ed says, when using the builder and adjusted after it spits out 150, what total ownership are you targeting, or are you looking more at the OF projection?
Yeah, I don't really look at total ownership for NFL, right? Especially with 13 games. Unless you're literally playing every single chalky player, it's not really going to come into play, right? When you get in the smaller slates, you get in Showdown, obviously. When there's less, maybe there's like 8 or 9 games on a main slate, sure you care about it. I'm not really looking at ownership, and I know that maybe that's blasphemous to say, but I think the way the model's set up and the way we build lineups, that it really doesn't come into play too much for high-risk contests.
I mean, we've talked about it before on other $1 million missions, where just by having a quarterback and a wide receiver, you're only that's like total combination of like 1% of lineups. So,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
So add anybody else after that, and you're pretty much unique. So
exactly. So.
Yeah.
Let me see. I got some other questions here from Discord. I'll bring them up.
Okay.
And
again, if you guys are watching, and you have any more questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now. We'll answer them.
All right. So we actually had 2 people asked the same question. Who's your favorite low-owned running back for high risk? I think people saw the preseason $1 million mission where we talked about this being the thing for us, right, this year, where we focus on more lower-owned running backs. For me, Moose, and maybe you have someone else that's different. For me, that sticks out is one is Nick Chubb, who is projected 6% on DraftKings. They might get Jack Conklin back. That's a big boost to their offensive line. They're playing against the Jets, their home favorites. I mean, this is a smash spot for Nick Chubb. Would it surprise anyone against the Jets if he put up 100 yards and 2 touchdowns? No, it wouldn't. And it's less than 10% ownership. That could be a game changer. The other one is, we'll see if he eclipses 10%, but it's Chase Edmonds. I know Chris talked about it in the plug. His role was really solid in week 1, passing and running. So Chase Edmonds, 5,200, a ton of salary savings, and maybe that's why he ends up getting bumped up a little bit. But Chase Edmonds at 5,200, I think is one of the best plays. I'm willing to go really heavy on him.
And you stole my answer. Damn. So I got to look at anyone else. So under 10%. I'm trying to look here. I mean, this seems crazy that we only have him projected for 8%. I mean, there's no way JT goes for 8%, right?
Is that on FanDuel or DraftKings?
That's on DraftKings.
Good question. Yeah, I think he could go that low just because of Devontae and Cup's prices.
Yeah.
So that's definitely possible. That is certainly possible.
Definitely, yeah. But there's a couple other people that rank highly in the model under 10%. James Robinson on the other side, if you want to go that way. Gibson maybe might get there. Only 2-point underdogs in a high total game. So there's a handful of people under 10% that can get you there.
Yeah, I think most of the ownership's going to concentrate on Saquon, which is the next question we got in the chat. Why is Saquon so low? He was low last week, right? We missed on that. Got it right on McCaffrey, missed on Saquon. But I'll look here in the back end to see why. And it has, like you said, it has nothing to do with the ownership, right? It's just that the team he's on, and yes, he had an insane role last week. But a lot of the yards came after contact. And yes, that's what makes him great, his yards after contact. But if he doesn't bust a ton of long runs, doesn't fall into the end zone, yeah, he's a good play, right? It's hard to find warts here, but the model's picking up on all these collection of things together, right? That says something that he's going to be owned more than he should. But for like small field, for low risk, I mean, he's a guy that makes a ton of sense, obviously, right? He's 23, 25% for a reason. So yeah. I would really only trust the model there for large field contests and go underweight there. For your small field GPPs, your leagues, your cash, I would still play him there.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm just looking here from a high risk perspective. If I have it sorted by DraftKings salary, and so Barkley's 7,300, and just around his price, you have Kamara, Mixon, Chubb, Swift. I guess maybe you can go down to Connor. So a handful of guys within that same salary range. And again, remember the OF model is trying to capture who can get there at that price. And so it's like a lot of those other people has a higher chance of getting there around similar price.
Yeah, the model's not convinced of his big performance last week, right? And whether that's right or wrong, right, we'll see. I will say, let's remember this one thing. I think we've talked about it before, early season, is that average draft position for season-long leagues is a better indicator for future production than season-to-date production through the first 4 weeks of the season. Right, so after week 1, what happened last week is less important than their average draft position, preseason expectations. Right, so just keep that in mind. I think if you're looking for low-owned plays, pivots, think of guys that were being drafted highly in season-long leagues, and unless their role was completely wrong, right, they just didn't perform last week, right? But if their role was completely wrong, that's a different thing. But if they had a high average draft position, didn't perform, that's more predictive than what they did last week. And that's true all the way up until week 4. It's when underperforming wide receivers start to kick in, and it's when the model really starts kicking into full gear. So just keep that in mind, right? If you're looking for those other players, if you did any season-long drafts, just think, this guy was drafted pretty regular. I got a lot of him, or he was going pretty highly, but didn't do much last week. Maybe that's a guy I can play this week and next week.
Exactly, yeah. And then, like you said, week 4 comes around. That's when me and Ed are firing on those 3-3-3 tickets. And as he points out, he says, look at Mike Williams.
Right. 4 targets, did nothing week 1. Was being drafted round 3, round 4 in most season-long leagues, and is the optimal captain on the Thursday Night Showdown slate. So, yeah, that's a prime example.
Exactly. Yeah. So, 5 more minutes left. Brian, I didn't know if there were any more questions left we had from Discord.
Yeah, let me take a look here. We got from Think Green in Discord says tight end seems pretty gross this week. He was hoping the model would like Jawan Johnson. Thoughts on him and punting tight end in general? When is that actually viable? Great question. Definitely a good question. I think it's more viable in low risk and small field, right? We actually saw Whistles Go Woo win the world championship 2 years ago now, punting with Durham Smythe at 2,500, right? Like just an insane way to win 2.5 million or whatever he won. So really smaller field, I think. But when you have to maximize points in large field, I'm not really as keen on it, right? Jawan Johnson had a great role last week, played a ton of snaps, ran a lot of routes. And yeah, for smaller contests, he'll likely pay off his price tag. Will he score 15, 20 points to do enough to win you a GPP? I'm not so sure. The model is clearly thinking that's not the case. So really, I think it's more of a function of contest size moves.
Yeah, you pretty much hit that on the head. And in terms of punting, I mean, just looking at the model here, outside of Andrews, who's 6,400, which seems very, very hard to get there at 6,400 with all the other smash plays. I mean, you have Higbee at 42, Alberto at 37, a couple other guys under 5. I think there's a couple of guys that can get you there that have the ability to score 15, 20 points in their game scenario at $3,000 to $4,000.
Yeah, I mean, Higbee's ranked really highly. And he got 11 targets last week. I think if you're just box score watching, he only had a couple catches. That might go overlooked. Mm-hmm. But 11 targets in this offense, right? That's there's a big reason. And only 4,200. The field's picking up on it a little bit. But, again, you're not too concerned about ownership there.
Definitely. I guess you could. I would love to see how it would fit. But if you had a Ram stack with Higbee, he's projected right now to get 7 targets. Have that and maybe get some other cheap plays in there to round it all out. I think that could be an option.
I mean, he's a great if you decide to stack that side of the game, right? He really balances out the Cooper Kupp salary a ton, right? Yeah. Stafford, Kupp, Higbee, that's a great 3-0 stack. And if you want to run it back with a Falcon, you can. You don't have to. So I really like that.
Yeah, they're 10.5 point favorites. We just talked about earlier in the show. Anything over 10, you don't necessarily have to bring back. So be a perfect 3-0 stack there.
Yep, and we got one final question. It was from Ed in Discord. Is who is the best worst play and the worst best play? For me, Moose, and you can answer this if you want. For me, the worst best play, just from like oh shit, this could really go wrong, is Daryl Henderson. I think it has to be.
Okay.
One of the highest owned running backs on the slate for good reason, right? Again, they're 10-point favorites. He dominated the backfield touches in week 1. But do we really know that he's the guy, that Cam Akers is going to suddenly get more work this week? Again, we go back to the ADP preseason versus week 1 expectations, right? Yeah, Akers did not get as many touches or snaps as we thought he would. But there's a lot of talk this week about, Cam has responded the right way. He's going to be a big part of what we do with him and Darrell, right? Like all these things. It would not surprise me to see him get more snaps. And I think in a vacuum, median expectation, Henderson's a great play. Cash, low risk, small field, I think you play the guy, right? But is it really that hard to conceive a scenario where Cam plays way more, Henderson underperforms, or whatever it is, and he doesn't pay off his ownership? I think that's really believable.
Yeah, I think that's I gotta start going first sometimes because you just take all my answers.
All right, then you go with the best worst play then. Who's a guy that's under 5% or something that looks like a really, really good play this week? Or super cheap that no one's playing? I have a really great answer.
So I was going to say so the one that popped out to me is CeeDee Lamb, and that's probably because I'm stacking Dallas with Cooper Rush, but yes. Cooper Rush can pretty much suck. Like he can be like, we don't know, we only know him from the one half of him coming in, and we've seen time and time again when backups are just called in, they're just in the moment, they can somehow pull it together and do something. Now he gets a whole week. We don't necessarily know what his strategy is going to be. Is he going to suck? Is he going to do terrible? For model's sake and my bankroll's sake, let's hope he does well. But I could definitely see that's a great player that you don't want to play.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. The guy I was thinking the best worst play, there's one that I don't think many people are going to play. Let me see if I can find him here in the model on my end.
That's never a good sign.
He is projected for 2% ownership. He is 3,700 on DraftKings, and it's Paris Campbell. Played a ton of snaps last week. Was actually their number 2 receiver. Their guy they drafted to be the number 2 receiver, Alec Pierce, he's out with a concussion this week. Not going to play. Michael Pittman is very, very questionable. I know Frank Reich said he's probably fine, but Pittman might be limited, even if he's not.
Real quick. Pittman is actually ruled out as of like 5 minutes ago.
All right, then we got to play Paris Campbell. I'm sure his ownership will skyrocket now, but he's going to be the number 1 receiver. So Paris Campbell season. There you go.
All right, let's do it. Cooper Rush and Paris Campbell.
Now you can play whoever the fuck you want, right? You can play Kupp, Adams, JT.
Definitely. So really quick, before we head out of here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the wide receiver model. And we're going to say, what did we say before? Was it under 5% or under 5,000?
Under 5,000, I think.
Under 5,000. And we'll say under 10% so we don't get chalky.
Okay. And that would just give us Greg Dortch, right? If we were playing cheap, popular guys. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. So, I'm curious. Who's going to get that touchdown?
Elijah Moore stands out tremendously. 4%. The clear number 1 there.
Yeah.
Clear number 1. And talented. and has put up his best numbers with Joe Flacco. I'm really like what the model's picking up. When I ran some builds today, even without putting any min exposures in, it was giving me a lot of Elijah Moore with game stacks. So like that's tough to do sometimes. So the model's like, you got to play Elijah Moore this week. So I love him as a play for sure.
I would say I gotta love how it's all coming together. It's like all these absolute studs are ranked so high in the model, and then here's so many good cheap ones that are also popping in the model as well. So for me, I was actually going to say Dotson. He looked good last week, and I think he can get there. I think he's very explosive. I think he can get a touchdown.
Sounds good. And only 6%. His price went up a little bit, so I don't know if people are going to play him. And I think people are smart now, right? So, he scored last week, he can't score again this week, and now it's like it's the opposite of recency bias sometimes. So maybe he goes overlooked.
Definitely. So, just making sure there's his Ed's all on Paris Campbell, so that's great. So that'll do it. If you have any more questions, again, there's Twitter, Discord, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Chris will either do a Q&A or some sort of video potentially tomorrow, but keep an eye out for that either way. But until next time, I'm Moose, alongside Brian from occupyfantasy.com. Have a good night.